Today, we're joined by Ben Perens, the founder of Nestwell, a platform focused on helping people understand and improve one of the most important and overlooked drivers of our health, the environments that we live in. Ben is building technology that helps you measure and optimize things like the air you breathe, the water you drink, the lighting in your home, and the hidden toxins that can quietly impact sleep, energy, and long term health. In this episode, we talk about why the home might be the highest leverage place to start when it comes to wellness, the environmental risks most people don't realize they're exposed to, and the small, practical changes that can meaningfully improve your health. If you're interested in health optimization, but want to start with the foundational things that shape how you feel every day, this conversation is for you. Welcome to In Alignment. I'm Annie.
And I'm Marissa. You were meant to find this today, and we're so glad you're here.
Welcome back to In Alignment. We are so excited to be here today with Ben. Ben, I'd love it if you could kick it off with just a short intro to yourself and what you're building.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I founded a company called Nestwell. We are a home health diagnostics platform and marketplace. What that actually means is we help people identify the hidden property and environmental risks within their home, and then we point them to solutions to help remediate those issues in the form of products, services. Our big worldview and thesis is that the home and the place where we spend 90% of our time is the highest leverage health tool that we have that has been just really overlooked in the past decade as the wellness world has exploded. So yeah, we feel really strongly that these inputs, air, water, radiation, lighting, everything down to the pots and pans you use are the main inputs to living a healthy life.
So you spent years at TrueMed working in supplements, consumer health, consumer behavior. You obviously learned a lot there about the health and wellness industry, and then you pivoted from supplements and services to focusing on the home environment. Tell us about that shift, and I think that could be a really good segue into why the home is so important. Obviously, you're building a company around it, but I think it's that one category of wellness that can go overlooked really quickly, but it's arguably the most important. So let's chat about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the shift was partly professional, partly personal. So I'll touch on both. So TrueMed was basically offering people the opportunity to spend their HSA and FSA dollars on more proactive forms of healthcare, which is an awesome mission, an awesome company. So definitely supporting things like, supplements and wearables and things like that. I think the shift away from supplements is less to do with the company and more with my own worldview. But I think the main learning at TrueMed was that people are ready for something different, right? There's this bucket of healthcare dollars that people were typically spending on prescriptions and doctor's visits. And we basically unlocked this way to say, hey, if you instead spent your money on a Peloton or a gym membership or, insert proactive wellness intervention, you may not need to then use it on a doctor's visit or a prescription. So the mission of the company, I think, highlighted that people are taking more agency over their health, looking for other opportunities and more proactive ways to spend those dollars. So that was kind of the first moments where I was like, oh, this movement from everyone going to their primary care physician is starting to move to, the function healths of the world where people are, doing their own testing at home. 40% of people under 40 don't have a primary care physician anymore. And I think that's just only going to grow. The at-home diagnostic space is booming. People just are taking more control over their health. So that was kind of the main learning from that. I think on my personal worldview of what has shifted, I think the more I dug into the supplement space and being a former college athlete, this was something that has always been in my life of you have your protocols and your regimens that work really well when you're in a certain phase. I just started to kind of question really how high leverage are these things, right? If we're doing the wearable and buying the organic groceries, but then washing them in dirty water, how much is the greens powder actually helping us? So I would say that shift was more of a personal worldview.
And when you switched to the home, were there any things that stood out to you about things that are in people's homes? Or what is it about our home? You mentioned the water. What are kind of the elements of our environment at home that contribute to our health?
Yeah, so it is in a way everything, but that is a very paralyzing statement. So to break it down a bit, the main things I would call out are air, water, and lighting are probably the most important. And in the air category, there's obviously outdoor air quality versus indoor air quality. But then I think the most overlooked piece is the things in our home that emit VOCs, so volatile organic compounds. So just to give an example, you buy a new mattress, like a non-organic mattress and you open it in your house, like that is what's called off-gassing. And you're then inhaling all of those things as you would if you just like painted a wall, and then, you're inhaling all of those fumes. So there are these kind of things that are just living amongst us. Same thing with gas stoves is like, there's, more and more research coming out that gas stoves are like horrible for your health. So I think that those were kind of the biggest like blind spots that I uncovered. And then I think the water quality is obviously a huge one. PFAS is gaining in popularity. And then I think lighting, when we talk about like high leverage health, which is really the crux of what we're building, we think that, the comparison I've made, it's like the ETFs of health, right? It's like boring, but it is what moves the needle. To give an example around light, there was this trial done in 2024 around circadian informed lighting. Basically, if you had a well lit, like circadian lit home, you had a 52-minute increase in like total sleep time. And to do that, like with willpower, you would have to go to bed an hour earlier. So it's this idea of like, what if you just put in better light bulbs and then you don't need to think about actively going to bed an hour earlier? It's like these little moments where you can set up systems that already exist, but will just benefit you in a kind of a compounding fashion over time.
Wow. And so, how much of this can we actually control? Because I wouldn't have thought that we can control our circadian, or that there was light that you could mirror a circadian rhythm around. I would have thought that, if you live somewhere that the days are really short, you're kind of stuck with that. And similarly, when you mentioned the gas stove, I lived in my apartment in New York for years. That's what it had. Yeah. How much of this can we actually improve or control versus you have to like pick a home or pick a place to live that already has these things?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something that I think about a lot because some of these interventions are really like simple and free, right? Like opening and closing your windows at appropriate times throughout the day, depending on outdoor air quality. And then there's obviously things like if you live next to a power plant, like that is a tougher situation to like mitigate. But I think the place that people can start are things like your lighting, right? Like blackout curtains, minimize like how much you burn candles and air fresheners, and using an exhaust fan when you cook, like all of these things that like really do stack up. But I realize like the list is pretty lengthy. I think the way I think about it is it's not being anti-tool. Like I think there's a time and a place for a wearable or a supplement. I think the idea is like we've just forgotten about the everyday things, so that everything we stack on top of it is not really doing much because we're again buying organic groceries and washing them in dirty water, to use that example.
That is such a good point. I always, with my prior business, Let's Feel Good, it was so focused on like helping people make these swaps. And a lot of the thesis was that, 0 to 90%, if you call 100 optimal health, 0 to 90, which gets you feeling pretty incredible every day, is built on inherently unmonetizable lifestyle practices. It's how you move your body, it's how you sleep, it's if you are bathing your body in endocrine disruptors. Like, we're so focused on optimizing our hormone health, and we might have $150 a month supplement protocol. But if we're taking a shower and bathing in dirty water and, seeping all these chemicals into our skin, because over 60% of what we put onto our skin is absorbed into our bloodstream, we are just like running in quicksand trying to solve these issues and also spending all of our money. And I feel like the health and wellness industry is built between 90 and 100. So it's like these little tweaks, the supplement that can make you feel marginally better, but only if you have a foundation of 0 to 90. And if you don't, it slips through the cracks. Like if our body is so inflamed, we end up peeing out the supplement. Or if, we're just we don't have great metabolic health, and like all of these things that we're doing, whether they're powders or supplements or workouts or IV drips or infrared saunas, they just don't move the needle. And I think that it's arguably like not sexy to think about the home and think about just what we do on a day-to-day basis, but it is literally the biggest lever to changing your health.
Yeah, I love that 90 to 100 reference. It's interesting and kind of counterintuitive because when you start talking about things like microplastics and like just very granular things, it can sound like you're the Brian Johnson biohacker. But the way that we're talking about it is it's actually, it's not like, it's kind of the other way around, right? It's like if you just focus on the things that you're doing every day, you actually don't really need to. I mean, you obviously can, but it's yeah, it's all about like setting up sturdy foundations. And, to your point about the wellness world being built there, I think that's for good reason. Like there is a ton of money to be made. in this space. And, I think, for example, like we spent about $170 billion on dietary supplements in like 2024. And the global market for air purification is about 17 billion. So it's like we're spending 10 times more money on supplementation than like the air that we're breathing every single day. Why is that? It's like no one's taking a picture of their air filter and posting it on Instagram. And it is just like not super exciting. Annie, I think I mentioned this to you when we initially chatted, but there's this writer, thinker, Brad Stolberg, who talks a lot about just like sustainable progress and across a variety of different verticals. And if I had to like pick a voice that would represent Nestwell, it would be him. And he talks a lot about like novelty makes us feel like we're making progress, right? Like it taking a capsule or taking a scoop of something is like, okay, I did something today. Like it is pushing me forward. And I totally get that. And people are wired to want to feel like they're making incremental change. I think the shift that we're hoping to at least bring to the light is that is maybe not overly necessary. And also like changing an air filter is probably higher leverage than, continuing to spend on these things that may not be moving the needle for you.
I also think there's an element of like intuitiveness with supplements, I've been anemic before, right? And so it's like, okay, I'm anemic, I'm going to take iron. I actually, over time, changing my diet was way better than taking an iron supplement. But I think there's an element of people can see maybe my diet isn't the best, or I conceptually understand how vitamin D can make me feel a certain way. And so the supplementation industry has done a good job of cause and effect style marketing, where it's like this supplement will make you feel XYZ. And I think that while it is in some ways so intuitive that the air we breathe is really important, even I'm struggling a little bit to think, okay, well, what are sort of maybe the day-to-day consequences and then the long-term consequences? Obviously, you can imagine maybe there's lung effects, probably cancer, but can you talk us through a little bit about like what the difference would make, maybe short-term, medium-term, long-term, for someone who invests, maybe, and I don't mean invest like even financially necessarily, but who starts thinking about maybe their air quality and improves it maybe from not a good place to a much better place?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the two big ones are sleep and focus. So, I think an example I've used in the past is I think Whoop, like Whoop and all of these wearable companies are awesome. Like I previously had a Whoop. I think that they're great companies. I think there's this missing puzzle piece, especially around sleep of, you know, it'll tell you that you slept poorly, but like, was your air quality the reason? And, sleeping in like a high CO2 space is something that you will feel just via fatigue over time. And then I think focus is another thing. There was a study done at Harvard where people in well ventilated green buildings had a 101% higher cognition rate. And I think that the focus thing is almost more interesting in sleep because of how many nootropics and, stimulant like Adderall and things that people are taking to focus. And it's this, again, this shift of like, what if you just did work in a really like well clean ventilated room? Would you feel the difference? The answer is like scientifically yes. I think that's just a harder thing to sell, right? So it is going to have a slower adoption rate because of it. So I would say those are like short-term things. Of course, long-term, like things like different types of cancers, fertility issues when it comes to mercury and PFAS in your water. I would say those are kind of the big ones that stand out.
Tell us about how the app works and like what insights do you get? And then how do you help people make the right changes?
Yeah, definitely. So we're a digital first product. So it's built on this database that sits on two layers. So we've been lucky enough to have an awesome team of medical advisors, a few of them from Stanford University who are public health experts and live and breathe, no pun intended, this stuff. So it sits on two layers. The first layer is historical property data. So by keying in your address, we're able to pull in things like, when was your home built? Was it built with lead pipes? Are you in a high humidity area, which would be something that would impact mold? All of these inputs that impact long-term maintenance and therefore health that people typically overlook. The second layer of that database are things like air, soil, water, and radiation. We're actually directly integrated with the EWG; they're a partner of ours. So based on that initial data, you get a dashboard with all of your metrics. And then based on that, we recommend a test kit for you to go kind of a layer deeper. So the database is aggregating, outdoor and more public things down to your parcel level. So like the address that you put in, but then you go from outside to inside the four walls of your house via a dust panel, a PFAS panel, whatever we think your biggest risk area is, we'll send you a kit for that. And then from there, we are a marketplace. So we have some awesome brands on the platform. We're recommending air filters and water filters and things like pots and pans. Like, we're really opening the scope to like all types of home goods. As I mentioned, like, Tupperware is like such an like probably like the least sexy thing in the world when it comes to like, and you would never think of it as like wellness, but like putting a plastic Tupperware in a microwave is just like, you already have Tupperware, just like buy glass ones. So like really trying to help people think in that way. And then longer term, we are getting into the hardware space and developing our own device, which is going to provide that, second to second monitoring, starting in the airspace. So that's kind of what the V1 and V1.5 look like.
There's a lot of greenwashing in the non-toxic space, and your marketplace is going to solve for this because the things that are within your marketplace have obviously vetted and they are not toxic and clean. But how do consumers even approach this industry? Like, I'm not in the weeds of it, but Caraway, like I heard that they're not even that clean. So it's like, what do we believe? What should we be buying?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that is like a core part of our mission is, and something that I personally struggled with. I'm happy to share kind of the personal background of like what my light bulb moment was to build this. But to answer your question first, our goal is to create a common language of what are the good things to put in your house and creating definitions within each category, and explaining that to the consumer, right? We have this tension of volume of products, but also quality of products. One, from a consumer experience, like no one wants to scroll through like 50 water filters, but I think it depends on the consumer bucket. So we kind of are targeting two different groups. The primary ICP for us is, think like the new parent, the new homeowner, the family trying to conceive. Like, those are those trigger moments that people really start thinking about these things. They are less worried about like the granular data and like how they're trending over time per se, and more concerned with like, what's my issue and like where do I solve it and what do I do to, kind of fill this gap. So we can definitely serve them. And the secondary group is kind of the more biohacker, like I would say like wellness forward consumer who is interested in progress and interested in understanding how they're able to impact their own score and trend line. And we also have built the platform to accommodate them. To answer your question, we have a recommendation engine based on the risk in your profile. We link that to specific potential health outcomes. And then each product on the marketplace is tagged with those health outcomes. So you're actually shopping by health outcome versus shopping by product, and really trying to have people think about that. And is there much variance between water filter A and B? Like, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Like, we just give the consumer the option to at least understand what they're purchasing.
I love that shopping by health outcome because I think sometimes it's just there is a never ending number of things that you could be putting in your home, things that you could swap. And I think even for me, as someone who pays a lot of attention to this stuff, I find it extremely overwhelming. And to Annie's point, one day something is good and healthy for you and you're doing it right. And then the next day, actually, that is filled with microplastics or causes cancer or, insert kind of scary headline here. And I think as consumers, we have a lot of fatigue around trying constantly like to improve our personal health through our diet and supplements and home. And then, it seems like almost an impossible thing to really control our environment in this way. How, to someone who's like brand new to this, you mentioned like water, air, etc. And then you also mentioned things like Tupperware. How much of it is kind of inherent to our space itself, like how old the apartment is versus maybe things that we're buying or like lighting candles? And if you were totally new to this, had never thought about this before, like where would you start?
Yeah, it's interesting because, to your point on like some of us just being the default of like where we choose to live. So there's like so many factors. And like, one, I am not a doctor, not a scientist, but there are just like structural things. For example, new homes, let me back up for a second. There's a misconception that outdoor air is just outdoor air inside. And what it actually is like this soup of compressed air that we're breathing like over and over again if we obviously don't have ventilation. So newer homes that are like really tightly sealed, for example, make it even harder to ventilate, which is like kind of counterintuitive, right? You're like, oh, this is a smart home. And maybe it has like built-in filtration, but like all else being equal, if you have candles burning and diffusers and a gas stove and you live in like a really tightly insulated home, like that would be like a higher risk for indoor air quality. So like that's something where I would be like, okay, like every morning I would open my windows and open my doors and just try and get some like cross ventilation in. I would swap things like buying organic bedding and organic mattresses. Again, the Tupperware and pots and pans things is kind of like an ongoing conversation of like what's good, what's not. But for all intents and purposes, like buying glass where you can. So there's these, and the way that we set the platform up is we don't want to be the brand that's just shilling products, right? So how can we create loops for the consumer that is this mix of like micro nudges of, hey, like your air quality is bad today. Like we'd recommend shutting your windows for a bit longer. Or things are getting more humid, like, ensure to like run a humidifier, something like that. Like we really want to be this companion every step of the way so that people feel like they're kind of have this 360 awareness of what's going on around them, and then can make decisions from there.
It's a daunting task. I things like adding in a water filter, adding in a air purifier, opening your windows, or switching out cookware. It's not as obvious, and you're not feeling like the results are as instantaneous, and it's also very overwhelming to navigate. So I feel like this is just such a brilliant idea that can improve so many people's health with kind of having to take out all of the guesswork and the researching that you would have to try and do if you're doing this on your own. So it's such an important idea. I'm curious, you talk a lot about high leverage health. Define that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I guess to quickly go back, I think it's worth sharing. Like talk about like the overwhelm. My big why behind this, there's a few of them, but the light bulb moment for me. So I live in LA. I'm originally from the East Coast and had never once thought about like wildfires. I'm a healthy person and I like have kept up with my health over time. And when the Palisades fire happened, I had to evacuate, and it was obviously a horrible experience for a variety of different reasons. People lost their homes and much worse. But I was in my apartment like a week and a half after the fires, and my eyes were burning. And then I went outside and walked down to the beach, and I looked down at my phone. And it was like covered in ash. Like this is 10 days after a fire happened, and it was this like, and this is when I was, in kind of the more mainstream wellness space, and was like, how on earth do I fix this? Like, and how do I kind of keep on top of this? And then I went into like deep research, and there's so much conflicting information and like most of this space, like a lot of fear-based marketing, and just found it incredibly like difficult to parse all of that out without feeling like absolutely paralyzed. So just wanted to kind of like add that in there of like, we hear the overwhelm piece, and that is like kind of a secondary goal is like, how do we make this like a little bit more digestible for consumers? Um, on the high leverage health piece, I think of it as like the boring basics, right? Like think about the things that you're doing every single day, whether or not like in 10 years you'll look back and say like, I made the right decision here in a sense. Like I think these are products and things that you have to do, right? You have to drink water, you have to breathe air, you have to take a shower, you have to sleep on a mattress. It's like you're already doing these things. Just make a better purchase decision and you will impact your health in a positive way because of it. It's like a set it and forget it mindset of kind of like, well, yeah, high leverage health, passive health. Again, not things that you will notice in 24 hours, but quietly over time, they're impacting you.
So, not to throw anyone under the bus here, and I certainly don't mean to, um, yeah, like I'm not trying to ask a political question at all. But when I hear this, my first thought is, shouldn't, you know, how much of this is being controlled by the people who are in charge of our water and our air and all of those things? And I know, like, I've been to China and I've been to Thailand during pollution season, and I've experienced when you were explaining the of wildfires, I was thinking about when I was there just during like quote pollution season. It was hard to breathe. My eyes were burning. My throat hurt. I felt those impacts comparatively, even living in New York, which some days has bad air quality. I notice the difference and feel much better. I've also been told that New York City, for example, has like the best tap water in the country. But then we also see things like, Flint, Michigan, or certain places that have this really bad, like after a fire, like I'm not even sure what that looks like to restore the soil and all of those things. So yeah, like for someone listening to this who's maybe thinking, well, surely our government is, or someone is making sure that our water is okay to drink, or our air is okay to breathe. Where do you think the line kind of is on like, actually, we need to really take ownership of that versus there are certain things that we don't need to worry about?
Yeah, I think it's definite. There's a regulation piece to this, like there is to everything. Obviously, like Maha is something that is, I think, trying to take a stance on. If you look at Europe, for example, like they have this ban until proven safe policy in a sense. They banned over 1,300 chemicals in like just cosmetics alone. And I think the US has banned like less than 20 or something like that. So it's like a fundamental stance that we have. Indoor air quality, for example, is actually not regulated by the EPA. Outdoor air quality is. But to your point about like taking agency, like it is, like as of today, it is up to the consumer to understand what's going on in their home, because there's not like federal bodies that are regulating it. It's, even if you look at the supplement space is like effectively self-regulated. And I think in like 1994 or 5, there was like about 4,000 or 5,000 like supplement products. There's like 80,000 or 100,000 now. So as this grows, people are becoming more and more discerning. And there's awesome companies out there that are, like Yuka, for example, is like giving people more understanding of like what are in like the groceries that they're buying. So I think this shift is happening because I think there is a lack of trust for good reason in many cases. I think we've just been slower overall at like a legislation level to like understand these things.
It is, like, deeply alarming what they allow in our products. It is not. I'm gonna explain this, but the last time I've actually read all of the research is a while ago, so it might not be perfect, but it was, like, in the 1970s. The FDA changed the legislation around this, where instead of having everything be approved by the FDA before you can use it in your product, it's up to the company's discretion to decide on any new chemicals that they make or any new ingredients in their products. If it is new and unique after that point in time, it is up to the company's discretion to determine that they're safe, which is horrifying. So it's like, we just don't even know what we're putting on our bodies. And like, we forget that if you're in the shower and you're scrubbing your head or you're lathering yourself or you're putting on makeup, literally over 60% of that is absorbed into your bloodstream. So
Yeah, I think like, that's why we're so excited to be partnered with the EWG. Like they've done a fantastic job in the cosmetic space, like really have become the source of truth in many cases for the products, natural and organic, just like they don't mean a ton anymore. It's a huge loophole, right? Like there's a difference between, like what is natural, what is organic, what is like certified organic. Like there's just lack of understanding, a lack of uniformity. And I think with volume, it's just making it like harder and harder for people to make decisions.
have you go ahead, Marissa.
I was just going to ask you to tell us what the EWG is, just for anyone listening.
Yeah. So the Environmental Working Group, they're a nonprofit organization that is really taking a stance on everything we're talking about right now, specifically in the cosmetics and water space. So we're actually directly integrated with their API. So the water data that you're getting through the Nestwell database from the digital data side is through the EWG. They have some of the brightest minds working on this stuff and have a unbelievable database of EWG certified products on the cosmetics side of things. So if you're ever curious, I would highly recommend going there and better understanding, the kind of over the counter cosmetics that you're buying.
Yeah, that is a really important resource. Have you noticed a shift in your health? Like obviously you're young, you're healthy, but having gotten into this space and like making a lot of these changes in your own life, in your own home, have you noticed any substantial shifts?
Yeah, I definitely have, and I think that there's a few ways, right? Like there's like things like taste of water that like make a difference when it's like filtered, especially like in LA. But then on a sleep level, I definitely have. I'm no longer a wearable user, but towards the end of my like Whoop career, I did like as I implemented more filtration in my ventilation in my home, my sleep score was just improving. And that to me was like the biggest takeaway. I think the days that are the air quality is good outside and I work with the windows open, I feel more focused. I think there's also a huge piece of this, which is just harder to measure, which is like peace of mind. I'm less stressed about other areas that like I would otherwise be optimizing because I just kind of have this background safety of like I'm doing most of the things right. Like I think the broader shift I have seen in myself is like I think stressed is probably the best word to use. Like really like competing against my scores and buying all the supplements. And I was doing it because I thought that there was this like hidden level of vitality that I was going to unlock. And I think it was just stressing me out so much more and costing so much money. Whereas I've over the past 2 years or so have really just almost taken the pressure off and been like, great, like I eat organic whole foods. I get to bed on time and like I drink clean water and do my best to breathe clean air. Like that to me is those are the conditions to like set up my life. I think that's the biggest shift I've seen is like health is not my life. It's like the ground floor, the foundation for what like allows me to just like go do the things I like to do. And that is like, that's by no means meant to say that like the biohackers of the world are like inherently wrong. They're not. And it's very much become like sport and hobby for people, which I think there's a lot of value in. I think the wellness world draws people in that are like really focused on growth, which I think is awesome and really noble. I do think there's a tipping point though where you can start to do more harm than good when you're distracted and really just all consumed by like trying to reach the next level when it's like that in my mind is not the goal.
I really want to talk about this because I think it is such an important point, which is people are often turned off, I think, by health and wellness in general because it does feel like this never ending optimization game and it's stressful and I think counterproductive in a lot of ways. And so actually realizing, oh, I could hit a point where I've set myself up and this doesn't have to be my life could actually possibly help a lot of people get, from 0 to 1. But before we kind of go into that, when you were talking about like making sure you're drinking clean air or drinking clean air, breathing clean air, drinking clean water, we're talking about the home. And for a lot of us, we don't spend all of our time at the home. Obviously, we sleep there, which is super important. But if you're in an office 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, are there any of these things that you might be able to bring to other environments? Or, are you just kind of at the mercy of, if you're traveling a lot and you're staying in hotels, is there anything you can do to better set yourself up for success outside of your home?
Yeah. So, I think that there, to an extent, obviously, when you go into another environment, there's like less you can do. I think that the tips I would give people is like, do your best to like have a glass water bottle when you can. Again, like we're going to like talk about Tupperware at nauseum, but like bringing food to like your workplace in like a glass Tupperware, stepping outside and getting air instead of just being inside all day, wearing blue light blockers and looking away from your screen, like all of these little things. A friend of mine went to the optometrist recently and they told him that you should be looking away from your computer like every 20 minutes, like even just for 20 seconds. And it makes like such a difference. I think that another piece of this is, the home health like built environment space is very much like we're in the early innings of it. There's some really cool companies focused on enterprise and like more like B2B. So measuring air quality in office buildings. So that's super exciting to see because of this, like the data is so clear on cognition and therefore for businesses, obviously they're like, how can I get the most out of my employees? Like part of that equation is having a properly ventilated building. So I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's a couple of companies right now deploying air sensors and basically trackers to, big companies. So hopefully in, 5 years, like all of our buildings are going to be well ventilated. But I think those are the kind of the smaller things that you could do in the meantime.
That's a really interesting point. This is a personal note, but I want you to touch on this because I think that it's invisible and not talked about enough. But I worked in an office a while ago with a lot of young people, and it was a shared co-working space, and so many people were vaping. And it gave me so much anxiety because one, it is literally, you can, take negative effects from secondhand vape smoke, even though it is odorless, even though it is invisible, like it is still incredibly bad for you to breathe in. And vapes and cigarettes, but vapes in particular, because people sneak them up their sleeves in offices or they're doing them indoors and in restaurants or wherever it may be. Those toxins then go and are forever chemicals that stay in rugs and stay in couches and stay in different materials in the walls. So you are literally taking in those toxins well after somebody has vaped and breathed it out and walked out of the room. So I think it's like stuff like, and I was anxious. I literally brought an air purifier and put it on my desk. I'm like, I need to get away from this. But I think that like, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about vaping and how like indoor smoking is so prohibited, but for some reason people vape inside.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like if you like watch a movie and like is there something like people are smoking indoors, and then there was this like massive gap where like we banned smoking on airplanes, and now it's like just for some reason back. I also had a similar experience when I worked in New York in an office, and people would go into these like single stall bathrooms and come out, and just a plume of smoke would come
Yeah.
up, and it's like I'll be honest, this was in my pre indoor air quality era, so I guess I didn't think about it too much then, but like you're right. And it is, yeah, we've kind of swung back to people smoking indoors. It's one of those things where it's like, to that, I would say, if you're at work and someone's vaping, it's like the home is still where you spend like 90% of your time. So it's like, just make sure it's good when you get home. Like, I think that's another moment where it's like, yeah, you could like stress yourself out, or like you could like do all these things. I think it's like control what you can control, bring an air purifier, report your coworker. Like I think it's just, we live amongst this stuff. I think, and it's easy to feel like there's nothing we can do. And in some cases we just can't, but I think taking those steps is probably the best.
Do you feel net hopeful when you think and talk about this stuff? Because again, just thinking about someone who's listening to this is one of the areas of health that makes me the most kind of nervous feeling, because I will often think like I eat really well. I go outside every day. I exercise. I try to keep my stress low. But then I'm like, okay, if my food is fundamentally like poisoned or bad or unhealthy, and my water is bad, and my air is bad, it feels like hard to feel optimistic about maybe the future of our health and our well-being and our ability to avoid things like, you know, cancer and other illnesses. But being so close to the space and seeing so many of the innovations that are happening. Yeah, like what's your kind of like macro level when you think about the future?
Yeah, I am hopeful. I think that to a degree, politics play a role in this. I think the Maha movement, depending on the day, is probably a net benefit just because we're talking about these things. I think that the delivery and the execution could at times use work, and the focus is as well. Like, I think that my hope comes from the fact that like this is becoming a discussion. Companies like Nestwell are popping up, and people are, unfortunately, things like mold related illness. Moldco is a company that recently launched, and like they're bringing awareness to it, and that's obviously the first step in anything. There's a really cool water company that just came out called Lunin, and they're doing great stuff in the individual packaged water space. So yes, I think we'll get to a better place, purely because people are monitoring it more, but there is going to need to be some sort of top down like mandates and regulation around these types of things, especially when people are buying and selling homes. Because like a home inspection, it's relatively transactional. Yes, people look for mold and things like that, but you would be surprised how many stories I've heard of. I bought this house, and then I went through an inspection, and then 3 weeks later we did a $70,000 mold remediation project. Like, there needs to be more of a health lens applied to these things, and that will, like, I think, make a big difference. But net, I'm positive, and yeah, we'll see where the next couple of years go. But we're hoping to help make a dent in some of this stuff.
And you also just reminded me of one thing. I think you mentioned earlier that a lot of the things that we could start to do are free or low cost, which I just think is important to mention, because when we do start talking about this kind of level of health, I also can't help but think of like, with so much of where health and wellness is going, it is becoming financially inaccessible to most people. And so we're creating this greater division of people who have money also have access to health or clean air or clean water, and people who don't are, what are they kind of supposed to do? And so I think you mentioned a few things that are just like pretty free, pretty available to anyone who might be listening to this. Is that, yeah, like opening your windows? Are there other things that people can kind of do?
Yeah, I think some of those swaps that we talked about are probably the biggest ones. And then like for the person and access is definitely like a focus area for us, because home inspections are just incredibly expensive, and we over time at Nestwell, we'll have the ability to do an in-depth home inspection. Our entry point is, we're $150 a year subscription, which is a Spotify subscription effectively. And our goal is to start the conversation with people earlier than later, and then give people the resources to layer on, some of those just objectively more expensive things. Um, you know, I think when it comes to cost, if you're buying, I think this would be my challenge for people. If you're spending $400 a year on a focus supplement or nootropics and you're unsure if it's working, like go buy a $400 air filter, try it for 6 months and like see how you feel. I think because then it's like, you then spend a couple like 60, $70 on filter replacements in perpetuity, obviously, but you're reducing your costs in that way. And I think there's like a couple of ways that people can start to think about this stuff and just running like little experiments on themselves, right? Like these are things that are net positive. So it's worth at least challenging kind of your existing thoughts on, what does my health stack look like? What is my health thesis? And also like, what are my goals? I think that like starting there and then working backwards, if you want to be like an Olympic athlete, and there's obviously like interventions that you need to be taking, but for most of us, it's always a little bit more boring and straightforward than it may seem.
It's so true too. It's like if you don't feel well, and then all of your money and your whole toolkit is sitting in the 90 to 100. So like the supplements, the infrared saunas, the, pricey external kind of what I think is like an accessory to your health. Like if you're putting together an outfit, your air filter is your shirt, your diet is your pants. Like it is literally like getting dressed. And then like, yeah, the supplement can be like your earrings. Like it makes you look marginally better, but it's like not the whole outfit. And I think people really need to start looking at their health like that. But it's like if you look at where you just don't feel good and then you look at where you're spending all your money to try and fix your problems, it's like, can we go backwards? And can we, reconstruct our home? And you end up probably saving money, arguably, because these things are lower cost and feeling better in a way that not just solves like the acute issue that you're trying to solve for, but also sets you up for a baseline. Like if you're purifying your water and your air and you're using non-toxic products in your home, that is like so much less chemical and toxins that you're breathing in or absorb. Like candles, fragrance is one of the worst offenders. You're just breathing in those chemicals. So it makes it so much harder for your body to maintain a state of health. So I feel like this foundational level not only funnels up to solve for your symptoms, but also just creates a stronger baseline.
Totally. And there's also this idea of this like multiplier effect when it comes to home health, right? Like taking a supplement or take any like one-to-one health intervention, right? You're impacting yourself. And when you have if you have a family, like you have a well-ventilated home, like just from like ROI perspective, you're impacting everyone. So it's like, if you think about like, what is like, and again, going back to like, what is high leverage health? It's like, how do I get the furthest with the least? And that I think is like a good example of something that is, just kind of a blind spot, right? Like, and I think there's reasons why, right? Like we feel we're making progress and maybe you do feel like some impacts at some point, but if that's the problem you're trying to solve, how do I go furthest with the least? I would look at some of these things.
So important. I'd love to wrap it up with some of maybe your routine, maybe some of your favorite swaps, your favorite products. Like share with us. You live and breathe this every day. What works? What do you love? What do you do?
Yeah. So let's see. I guess as far as routine, it's not that exciting. I am big on movement. I like any day that starts with movement is, a good one in my opinion for a variety of reasons. You guys got me with an early podcast here at 7 a.m. Pacific. So I was like
Yes.
up this morning. It's okay. I was up this morning and got some movement in. Like that to me is just like the best thing I can do for like my brain, honestly. And from there, it's pretty standard. Like I do my best to eat as just purely whole foods. I'm not like, I don't freak out if I'm out with friends and I need to eat something that's not a whole food, but that's a focus for me for sure, just because I feel better. It's not like necessarily like obsessing over like the calories or anything like that. It's just like I feel a tangible difference when I'm eating organic whole foods versus not. Clean water. I drink out of glass bottles. I use Aurora water filter, which are great. Another great one is Boro, Boroux. I use a molecule air filter and then a Sans air filter as well. I recently went through a big like cutting board swap because I didn't realize that one of the wood cutting boards that I had actually had like a thin layer of plastic on it, or it was like it was like wax or like covered in something. So I think cutting boards are another interesting thing. Um, and shower head filters as well. I recently was talking to a friend who was going to school in Philly, and when he moved there, he like started losing a healthy person started losing his hair and didn't realize that it's because the water was so hard and had obviously like a bunch of stuff in it. Got a Jolie shower head filter and like hair grew back within like weeks. So, and also like skin breaking out and stuff like that. So,
That happened
yeah,
to
I would,
me when I moved to
yeah,
New York. I had crazy acne, like
yeah.
breaking out insane. And then it's literally I got the Jolie shower filter. As soon as I switched my shower filter, it totally resolved.
Yeah,
Also,
they're on the marketplace, and they were like the first I would say to like really make a splash in this space. Sorry, Marissa, go ahead.
oh no, you would just earlier also mentioned mattresses, and I want to say mattresses and acne can be a big thing. There's this whole people can go investigate on TikTok. There's this whole kind of discovery going on with people getting really, really bad kind of hormonal acne all after getting the same mattress. And they did some testing and there's massive like endocrine disruptors in there. And so I think if you are in an environment and all of a sudden your skin starts breaking out, definitely like I just think we're so kind of engineered to think that I need to put more products on our face, but like our environment has such a big impact on acne. And I've struggled with acne like all of my life. So I didn't know, and no one ever suggested that I should look at my environment until like the last year or two. So it really makes such an impact on those things.
Yeah, and we partnered up with Sattva mattresses as well as Naturepedic on the Nestwell platform. You know, mattresses aren't cheap, obviously.
Yeah.
So a part of being a Nestwell member is getting up to 25% off these products on our marketplace for members. Um, so yeah, definitely agree with you. It's one of those like sneaky things that you're sleeping on every single night for like years. Um, so
Stuff we don't think of. Like I honestly I would not have thought about mattress and skin. That's so interesting. But it's high
yeah,
level. Yeah, it's expensive, but you buy it once and then you have it for years in better health.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Ben, this has been such a great episode full of so many things. I'm going to go and order a few new things after this. But thank you for coming on. We will obviously link everything in the show notes, but where can people find you?
Yeah, so I am ramping back up on Instagram. I took a breather for a while. So just Ben Perens on Instagram. You won't find much right now, but more coming soon. I have been doing a lot of writing. So my Substack's Tiny Sticks by Ben Perens. And yeah, I would recommend people check out gonestwell.com. We just opened our waitlist on Tuesday. We are doing a private beta launch in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be fully live over the next, month and a half. So plenty more to come across all platforms for Nestwell.
Amazing. Thank you. We will talk to you
Yeah,
soon.
thanks so much.
Thank you. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to pause and notice where it's sitting within you.
Living in alignment is not about fixing yourself or becoming someone new. It's about listening, trusting, and slowly coming home to who you already are.
Thank you for spending this time with us and for being part of this community.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might resonate with it too. See you next time.